Welcome. Take it away, Jenny.
Thanks everyone for joining us for our July website chat. This is a slightly different date for us. Typically, we would have done this meeting in the middle of June, but our June commission meeting got pushed back. And then I had some travel with the American Library Association conference and other things. So thank you for taking the time to join us in what is not typically our normal meeting date. We'll talk about what our August meeting date may look like a little bit later on. So thanks for joining us. Let's go ahead and look at what we want to cover today. If you haven't heard, the State Library had a flood on Sunday night, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We want to share some of our typical state library updates, including an update on staff and the Network Advisory Council's work with the Commission to adopt a statement in principle on the freedom to read. We're going to talk about the recent commission meetings and share some updates from those meetings, and then talk about our recently adopted Library Services and Technology Act 5-year plan and our FY23 library development plan. So we have a fairly full agenda for today's website chat. First, a little bit about the flood. As you can see, we had a considerable amount of damage. If you've been in the State Library, this photo was taken Sunday night in the lower level of the library where our talking book collection is housed. We had a storm drain on the roof fail during a major rain and hailstorm that occurred Sunday evening. We got about an inch of rain in a very short amount of time, and that storm drain failed. And so it sent water through the main floor cubicle area of our staff down into the basement. We had on the main floor a couple of inches of standing water throughout the main floor, and then numerous ceiling tiles breaking and water pouring into the lower level as well. About 75% of the library had some form of water damage. The restoration team is currently evaluating the extent of the moisture damage to determine how much a restoration work will need to occur. But minimally, about 75% of our area has been impacted. Of course, because our collections are largely online, we really didn't have any damage to the collections within the State Library. The greatest amount of damage occurred to our computer equipment. We're still assessing how many workstations and other forms of computer equipment were impacted. And then our records management and records storage area in the State Library was impacted. We think we lost about 6 boxes of records, and Belfour Restoration, the firm that the state is working with, is going to take about 30 boxes of records offsite to attempt to restore them. So, it was a significant amount of damage. We don't have any kind of estimated timeline for when we may be able to return to the building, but in terms of our ability to be able to offer continued services, I'm just amazed again at how resilient our staff have been. We had staff who weren't impacted at all. Other staff were impacted for about a half a day on Tuesday. Most staff were operating normally by about Wednesday, and we have staff working remotely from here on out until we're able to return to the building. So the services themselves really haven't been impacted. We talked a couple website chats ago about the fact that we were going to be outsourcing some of our talking book services, specifically the circulation and readers advisorship, to the state of Utah. And it just happened that that contract had been executed and up and running on June 22nd, so a couple of weeks prior to the flood. Without that contract in place, our talking book services would have been put on hold as we were cleaning up and managing the collection and setting up operations elsewhere. Thankfully, that didn't have to happen. because that contract is in place with the state of Utah. So we're just so grateful that that process went so well. So by and large, we are up and functioning. We don't know how long we'll be out of the library, but at least for several weeks into the foreseeable future. I was just going to try to share a photo or two if I can. I was just up there earlier, and I don't know if it's going to let me do this. It wanted to a minute ago. It might not let me. I'll figure out a way to get some photos to collate. But we have a bunch of ducks coming out of the state library right now. They have super high-powered dryers blowing extremely hot air into the library to dry things out. I understand that it's still very wet and it'll be wet for a number of days. So I'll figure out how to share some interesting looking photos with you. Let's go ahead and move on to some of our other updates. Again, we want to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes from the Directors Institute, share an update on the statement in principle for the Freedom to Read, updates from the State Library Commission meeting, our LSTA 5-year plan, and our library development plan. So let's move on. I'm going to ask Tracy to share an update from our recent Directors Institute.
So we held the Directors Institute in May in Great Falls, and it was our first face-to-face training in a really long time. And the directors that attended really spent some time kind of talking to me about what was going on in their libraries and their communities. And what you are seeing on the screen is basically a word map that highlights some of the things that they said during that process. And I asked Jennie if I could just share it because I know many of you are directors and thought you might find it interesting to see what your peers had to say, and just maybe a little bit I was curious about whether or not you are also experiencing some of these challenges in your libraries and in your communities. I would say it kind of came down to about 4 things that really jumped out at us in terms of challenges that the library directors identified. The first one was tension between their local government officials and the library. And that tension was caused by a variety of things, from just a lack of understanding of the library and the value it adds, as well as misunderstandings about the roles and responsibilities of local government officials and library officials. There was concern about low wages. That probably impacts all of you, I'm sure. You know, it makes it very difficult to recruit and retain library staff. And then also, there is sort of a sense of library directors are often department heads and do quite a bit of work and have more responsibility than they're given credit for, and they are not being paid fairly for that work. So that was another challenge. And then there were concerns about new directors being mentored and being able to connect both with each other and with experienced directors. And finally, I would say the other one that came out was the recent kind of uptick in book challenges that we're seeing in Montana and across the nation, and even some laws that are kind of criminalizing the work of library directors. So those were some of the concerns that were on the minds of your peers. And we kind of worked together to talk about these action items and what we could do immediately. And so Jennie and Alyssa Ramirez, who was an attendee at the Directors Institute, presented to the Montana Library Association Board at their June meeting and really talked about some of these challenges. And I believe the Montana Library Association is starting to think about ways they can support libraries. I know Pam Henley, one of our statewide consulting librarians, has reached out to kind of explore the idea of mentorship for directors and trying to figure out how to revitalize that program, because we have kind of had that service at one point or another. And then I am working with the Montana Association of Counties, and then I've also reached out to the Montana State University's Local Government Center to try and figure out if we can offer some face-to-face sessions that would be for both local government officials and library officials, just kind of exploring their respective roles and helping to build that understanding with a focus on finances, which seems to be like a real area of tension, is the whole budgeting and revenue. So those are some of the things that we are doing that came out of the Directors Institute that I wanted to share with you. And I also want to acknowledge Kara Orban, my peer, who was working with a different group of directors, and I know they are exploring book club kits and how to efficiently kind of offer that service and connect people to that, and then also looking at the cost share formula for some of the state library services, and then expanding sort of resource sharing. So they're doing some work as well. And the next thing that Jennie is going to talk about, the Freedom to Read statement, I told her it was a good fit here because it fits in really nicely to one of the concerns libraries had about the criminalization of librarians for ordering materials. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jennie.
Thanks, Tracy. If anybody has any questions for Tracy or thoughts or comments, reflections on some of the challenges that the State Library heard from the Directors Institute, please feel free to jump in or share anything in the chat. So the State Library Commission, myself working with Kenning, and then charging the NAC to help us, is working on a statement in principle on the freedom to read. We felt like it was appropriate for the State Library to have a statement about the importance of the freedom to read, not only because doing so aligns with our mission and values, but also we know that libraries are looking to the State Library for this kind of guidance. And in talking with our commission members, many of them hold true to the value that no one has the right to determine what somebody else can read. And so that is kind of the basis from which the State Library is starting our statement on the freedom to read. The quote that is shared here is a quote, obviously, from Thomas Jefferson in a letter to Charles Yancey. Kenning wanted to make sure that it was this quote and the ideas behind this quote that were at the heart of the freedom to read, and that it's not just about reading, but how access to information and the freedom to read supports individual thought and ultimately then supports our democracy. With that as sort of the foundation of a statement on freedom to read, the Network Advisory Council has drafted a statement. And Cole, if you wouldn't mind just dropping into the chat the link to that NAC meeting so it's available for folks if they want to follow up. The statement acknowledges the importance of library professionals and their role in both creating collection development policies and then using their professional expertise to build collections for their libraries. The statement acknowledges the State Library's role in providing open access to information for the State Library's patrons. This statement includes an acknowledgement that citizens, users of libraries, have the right to question materials in their libraries, and that libraries have processes for managing those kinds of concerns as they happen. And ultimately, that this work is necessary and critical to uphold the rights of Montanans and all of us as citizens of the United States. The commission had, I think, a very thoughtful and well-informed and supportive discussion for this statement on the freedom to read at their June 15th commission meeting. And I heard strong support from the commission members for making this kind of formal statement from the commission. So I'm heartened by that. There was a little bit of discussion about whether or not acknowledging a citizen's right or library user's right to challenge materials was appropriate in the statement or not. Some felt that it undermined the value of the freedom to read statement. Other commissioners noted that if the audience for this freedom to read statement are non-library professionals, the general citizens of the state, they may not be aware that our collection development policies allow for people to question content in our collection development policies, and that making sure that the statement acknowledged that was important. The NAC considered that question coming back to them from the commission and agreed that leaving that statement in the freedom to read statement would be helpful for non-librarians. And so a revised policy that does include a statement on the opportunity for library users to question materials will be going back to the commission at their August 3rd commission meeting. And we hope that the commission will adopt that statement in principle at that meeting. Again, that's going to be the meeting that will be held at the Montana Library Association conference in Missoula. So if you're planning to go to the Tri-Conference, I encourage you to come to that commission meeting. It will be at the Missoula Public Library on August 3rd. So fingers crossed that the commission will move to adopt the statement coming out of the Network Advisory Council. I'm going to pause there and ask if there's any questions or discussion. Okay, so a few other updates from our recent State Library Commission meetings. The State Library Commission adopted a slate of Network Advisory Council members. You'll recall that we've revised both the membership of our Network Advisory Council and the process by which new members are appointed. We have 9 members serving staggered 3-year terms. And this is the second year now that the commission has voted on the slate of Network Advisory Council members. I'm pleased to let you know that the commission has reappointed Mark Wetherington from the Bitterroot and Lori Kennedy from the Dillon Public Library. They will now each serve 3-year terms. And Alyssa Ramirez was appointed to the NAC. She will also serve a 3-year term. This is her first term on the Network Advisory Council, and we're really excited to have her join us. The next meeting of the Network Advisory Council is going to be their annual retreat. It's going to be held here in Helena on July 14th, so next Thursday. We're bringing in a futurist organization called KEDGE. I love the name KEDGE. It means the little boat that goes before. So I just find that entirely charming and appropriate for a futurist kind of organization. One of our goals as an organization and in working with the Network Advisory Council and our core services committees is to help us to think about and better anticipate what kinds of changes are going to be impacting libraries. What do we need to be paying attention to? And how can we pay attention to those kinds of trends in ways that help us to be more proactive? That kind of thinking is not something that necessarily happens naturally or intuitively. It really is something that has to be learned and practiced. And so the goal of this retreat and bringing in KEDGE is to help us gain some training and some practice in being more future focused. And so the Network Advisory Council will be joining us. The course service committee members have been invited. State library staff will be joining us. And this is an open meeting. It's not going to be held on Zoom. It's going to be held here in Helena at the Department of Natural Resources conference room, since our conference room isn't available, and people are welcome to come and listen in. really excited to have us be able to participate in this kind of learning opportunity. The commission also accepted 2 new members into the Montana Shared Catalog. The Harleton Public Library has been approved to join the Shared Catalog, and I'm just thrilled. That's one that I've wanted to see join for a long time. And then the Billings Public Schools will be joining the Shared Catalog, and I believe there are about 31 schools in that school system. So one school system with a number of libraries that will be added. Colette shared a fantastic overview of the history and background on our continuing education and certification program with the commission. We are planning to update the CE program over the next year. And so I know Colette will talk a little bit later on about a call for volunteers to serve on a task force to help us with that effort. And there's some great information in the State Library Commission meeting materials about the history and status of our CE program. And then the commission adopted both our Library Services and Technology Act 5-year plan and our FY23 Library Development Plan that we're going to spend some time talking about here in just a few minutes. The commission also adopted our FY23 plans of service for the 6 library federations. So federation coordinators, thank you for your work in helping to develop those plans of service and getting them submitted to the commission for the commission's approval. I've mentioned the freedom to read statement that was discussed. At the recommendation of the Network Advisory Council, the commission is also considering 2 different draft policies that they'll also take action on at the August meeting. The first is a virtual programming policy, like libraries programming policies. As we start to think about offering more collaborative virtual programming supported by the State Library, we realized that it's important for us to have a programming policy that helps us determine what kinds of programming we want to offer and allows for user participation in discussions about the content and the types of programming that's offered, understanding that the State Library Commission has a role to play if anyone were to challenge virtual programming that might be offered in the state. So that's the first draft policy that the NAC is recommending that the commission adopt. The second policy is an update to the Montana Memory Project collection development policy. That policy has been in place for a while, but it did not have a means by which people might question content within the Montana Memory Project. And so we wanted to make sure that that need in that policy is being addressed. Again, as the policy has been drafted, the State Library Commission would ultimately hear any challenges to content within the Montana Memory Project that couldn't be otherwise resolved. So again, the commission had discussion on those 2 draft policies, and we expect the commission to take action on those policies at their August meeting. I wanted to also mention the status of the Montana State Library rebranding. The State Library had taken a proposal to a new logo to the commission on June 15th. And unfortunately, that logo was met with some concerns by some members of the State Library Commission. We had a meeting with the commission on July 15th, and they ultimately voted down the proposed logo. And so Kenning has appointed a subcommittee of staff and commission members to help advise on the status of the current logo and how it might be used as a jumping off point for us to consider revisions or a potential new logo design. All of this effort is a part of a much larger rebrand. I think that point is something that's getting lost in the debate about the logo itself. The State Library started this rebrand effort 18 months ago because we recognized that people were not aware of and familiar with the state library. And even if they were using our services, they didn't know that the services came from the state library. And many people, most people in Montana, don't know that there is a state library, don't know what the state library does. And so the rebrand is really intended to be a much larger effort to inform Montanans about the important work that we do and to unify our services under a single brand to address the problem that people are using our services and won't realize it. So that the process of the rebranding is going to be drawn out longer than we anticipated as the commission discusses next steps for the logo itself. But hopefully the overall rebrand will ultimately be successful once those matters are resolved. The subcommittee that Kenning has appointed will be making a report back to the full commission at the August commission meeting again in Missoula. So if that topic is of interest to you and your patrons, just know that those are the next steps and there'll be discussions at the August commission meeting. So some very busy, important couple of commission meetings. Again, meeting materials, the recordings themselves, and the materials are all posted on our website. So if you want to follow up and learn more, just let us know. We can point to those materials. And we really hope to see you in August at the Tri-Conference. And then just a quick reminder that Thursday, August 4th, I believe it's at 11:30, the State Library Commission will be hosting our regular conversations with commission session that we host at the Library Association conference. So it'll be a great chance for you to have a chance to interact with the commissioners who will be at the Tri-Conference. Whew. Coley, I know we have the break a little bit later on, but I wonder if we want to have our minute break right now.
We can absolutely do that. That's a very good idea. Take a drink of water.
Take a drink of water. The sun is shifting. It's getting a little warmer where I'm sitting. All right, if we have everyone back, let's go ahead and talk about our LSTA 5-year plan and our library development plan. And just a little bit of background. We are required by the Institute of Museum and Library Services to submit a 5-year plan every 4 to 5 years that describes how we are going to use our Federal Award of Library Services and Technology Act funds and how our goals align with the goals of the IMLS. And so the process by which we develop these plans includes the evaluation that was recently concluded by Quality Metrics on behalf of the State Library and recommendations that they have for our upcoming plan. That includes seeking feedback through surveys from a variety of our different stakeholder groups. We met with our Network Advisory Council to talk to them about the priorities that they see going forward in the next 5 years. And then all of that culminates in the writing of the LSTA 5-year plan, which was ultimately adopted by the commission at our June 15th commission meeting. And then tied very closely to the LSTA 5-year plan is a new plan that the State Library has adopted for the first time this year, a library development plan. We've been talking about this for a little while as we've been thinking about how we kind of modernize our Network Advisory Council and think about the goals for the wider Montana Library Network. The State Library has a land information plan that we develop each year that describes the goals of our GIS program for the State Library. And it's a way for us to remain really focused on what the priorities are for GIS and land information development. So we've adopted that planning process as a model for library development as well. The LSTA 5-year plan is obviously a longer look forward, and it's sort of an umbrella for the priorities over a longer period of time. The library development plan then is a more near-term articulation of what those goals are for the upcoming year. Obviously, we don't anticipate we'll accomplish everything, but it gives us focus for the upcoming year for what we want to be working on with our staff and with our core service committees and with the Network Advisory Council. So we're excited to have the opportunity to do that kind of planning work. We're sharing information here, information about some of the highlights from the library development plan. The goals for this plan were really informed by some of the core service committees. So, for example, developing the Montana Memory Project platform, our new Recollect platform, and policies that support end user engagement. There's a lot of functionality within the new platform that allows for a lot more end user engagement. And the Montana Memory Project Core Services Committee recommends developing those policies as a priority for the coming year. We want to be able to improve and expand the courier system. We want to be able to support building positive relationships with local governments. As Tracy said, that was highlighted as a critical need right now. Continuing to work on supporting internet speed and quality technology services to and through libraries. And continuing to support our early literacy and outdoor literacy efforts through Ready to Read and That Week. Again, these are recommendations that are coming from our staff and our core services committees. Some of the other priorities for the Network Advisory Council themselves include looking at doing more of a kind of a geographic divide study in the state of Montana. We talk a lot about the digital divide and what that looks like among Montana libraries. We're interested in knowing more about what is the impact of geography between more urban and more rural libraries. How do miles and distance impact library services, and what might we be paying attention to improve access to libraries for Montanans who are the most geographically remote from our libraries? The Network Advisory Council is also going to be looking at the cost share formulas for our different consortia to see if we can make the process of managing those cost share formulas and budgeting for those systems more effective. So some concrete work for the Network Advisory Council themselves to be focused on, as well as just continuing to develop the work of the core services committees, become more familiar with the process of evaluating the kinds of priorities that we're working on and developing the planning process going forward. I'm going to turn things over and let Tracy talk a little bit more about some of the priorities from the LSTA 5-year plan.
Thanks, Jenny. And Cole, if you could go back to the previous slide, I'd like to kind of talk about the goals that are in the LSTA 5-year plan. Thank you. So basically, Jenny kind of mentioned all the ways that we got feedback from librarians about, I guess, what you need and what you think your patrons need. And we kind of came up with these 4 goals, and we tried to focus really on Montanans. And so the very first one is actually been a goal of the state library for a long time. I mean, actually, I think since 2001, if not earlier, and it directly supports your work in libraries. So all Montanans have access to library content, services, and information. So the kinds of things that fall within this goal are the Montana Shared Catalog, the Montana Memory Project, Montana Library to Go, OCLC, resource sharing. So those services that you've been using kind of fall within that goal. Goal 2 is kind of that recognition of the role technology and the internet have to play in people achieving their personal and professional goals. And so within this, you're looking at things like the internal wiring project that we're engaged in right now, the efforts to upgrade networking equipment and cabling in libraries, efforts to support hotspots in libraries. Also, some consulting and continuing education work falls into this, particularly related to using technology, addressing the digital divide, supporting digital equity, and supporting libraries and being able to have the funding and technical support they need to provide this technology and the tools for people to use in libraries, or, obviously using like the Wi-Fi of the library. Number 3 is one that really has kind of risen to the top in the last few years. It's just kind of a recognition that libraries need to work closely with their local government officials and their community leaders, and that it's all of those individuals working together that ensures that community members are getting the services they need. And so this one is very much falls on the shoulders of the consulting and continuing education services and developing and continuing to work on our partnerships with the Montana Association of Counties and the League of Cities and Towns and other agencies that work with local governments and to help librarians and board members in particular kind of feel more confident in their work with local governments, and in, I hope, helping to educate local government officials about the value of libraries and the roles and responsibilities of all the parties when you're talking about library services. And then number 4 is about lifelong learning. And so it really drives the work of Amelia Kim, our lifelong learning librarian. So this is where you're going to find references to projects like Ready to Read, our early literacy program, the Giant Map of Montana, Bat Week, and those programs focused on kind of outdoor and geoliteracy. And then also some of her work with economic development and helping libraries support small businesses. So these are sort of the 4 overarching goals that we are working on. I would say 1, 2, and 4 existed in some form or another in our previous 5-year plan. And even number 3 was somewhat present, but we really honed in on that local government piece because we've been hearing lately that that's really the crux of the matter for a lot of libraries. So Colette shared in the chat the LSTA 5-year plan, so you can see it. It's pretty lengthy. I just wanted to highlight the goals and then explain which projects fall within these goals so that you could have some sense of what we're going to be working on and where the services you might use lie within this plan. And then Colette also shared with you the library development plan. And as Jenny said, that's kind of like really looking at the next 1 to 2 years, like this is what we are going to do. And I just picked some highlights from here. There's quite a bit more in that library development plan, and kind of the next steps for us as library development staff are to come together and talk about, okay, how do we actually get this work done? I've worked with many of you. You actually know me, and I'm always like, strategic plans should not collect dust. And so we will be talking about this as library development staff and kind of putting it on our own work plans and just helping you in doing your work in your communities and supporting you. So with that, does anyone have any questions for Jenny or myself on the LSTA 5-year plan or the library development plan?
I just wanted to mention that we continue to seek volunteers for our core services committees. Those include collection management and resource sharing, e-resources, the Montana Memory Project or Cultural Heritage Core Services Committee, lifelong learning and technology. So If you or anyone on your staff have interest in these areas, please do let us know. We'd love to have your involvement as we think about how we deliver quality course services to you and through you to your patrons.
It's a pretty quiet group today. So please do, if you have a question, you want to open the mic and go ahead and do that, or add your questions in the chat. That helps us to make sure that if there's anything on your mind that we can be responsive to that. If we're ready, Jenny, maybe I'll just briefly mention and share an opportunity to join that continuing education task force. We've had information that's gone out in the MLN newsletter, the CE newsletter, as Jenny has mentioned. This has been something that's been shared at our commission meetings and with the NAC, but we will be seating a task force to do the work of updating our continuing education and certification program. You can snap that QR code on the screen if you'd like to nominate someone or apply yourself. And I'll put a link to the form here, but we would like to have nominations closed by the end of this month, July 31st, and then we'll get our task force members selected and seated, and then actually the first Zoom meeting of that task force will be at the end of September. So if you know someone, or if you have great experience or any experience around the continuing education program, whether that's just recent or kind of a long history, we'd love to have a variety of people, including trustees in particular, who can help us really think about what improvements we can make to this continuing education program. So like I said, I'll put the link to the form, or you can snap the QR code on your screen.
While Cole is doing that, as a staff member who served on the task force when we updated it, about 10 years ago, Cole, the feedback from librarians was really, really important, because you're the ones who really are going through the effort to work through this program and to become certified. So I really do encourage you, if you can find time, it would be so helpful. It's incredibly critical to have your voice on the task force.
And as always, be sure and stay in touch with us. There's a variety of ways where you can get information about our work and to communicate with the staff. We try to be as transparent as possible, providing information via our website. We have our Gov delivery channels with a variety of different newsletters, and then our summary Montana Library Network newsletter that summarizes information from a variety of different channels. We continue to post to the Wired listserv, our Aspen events calendar, and of course, we're always available and love to talk with any of you via email or phone. Feel free to reach out anytime. So, lots going on here at the State Library as usual. What I really want to say is I hope I see you in August at the Montana Library Association conference. It's been way too long, and I really, really look forward to seeing and connecting with many of you in just a few short weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And I'll get the recording posted a little bit later this afternoon. And do anytime reach out if anyone has questions. As Jenny said, we're available, and our phones do work, even though many of us are working remotely and using digital versions of our phone. I just get so excited when the phone rings and have the opportunity to visit and to solve problems and to answer questions. So do reach out. It's great to hear from you. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.